that the joke was that it couldn't possibly be real. And I don't know if the story is in this program, so I won't go into great detail, but everybody knows that once a week, he used to have a limousine take him from either the office in Stamford or sometimes even his home in Greenwich, where the polo ponies roam free, down to this hotel in New York City
easy there,
to get a haircut from the guy that cut his hair once a week.
Days now.
So how many hairs is he cutting?
Get your bearings.
And
let's see what
the
the
haircut
damage is.
this was in the late 90s, cost $100.
Can you tell me your name?
Plus tip, I assume. So Vince was spending $400 plus tips plus 4 limo rides from Connecticut to New York and back every month 25 years ago on his hair.
He was the fool. He's the one who chose to live in Greenwich. He could have lived anywhere he wanted. Isn't the story that he once said that when he was starting things up, I read this somewhere. I don't remember where.
How about that?
He was going to live in one of two places. Beverly Hills or
easy
Greenwich,
there,
Connecticut.
easy.
He just figured those are the places to be the person I want to be. I would need to live.
Why don't you just relax?
I don't know that I ever saw that, but
Let's see
I
what the damage is.
can't shoot it down as
How about your
false
name?
because it sounds like something he'd
Can
say.
you tell me your name?
Except I think probably he obviously always wanted to be in New York, but if it wasn't going to happen
what I'd have
there, I'm sure that California would have suited his principles.
Could you see Vince living in a city?
Now, I hope you don't mind,
yes.
but I had to go rooting around
see, that's the thing. One time we're in the limo, right? Going to something, and for whatever reason, it was just me and him on the way to the shoot. Bruce wasn't there, JR wasn't there. And I'm just looking out the window at the traffic, and at least with the limo, it's not so nerve-wracking. You're not the one driving. I didn't have any fucking financial interest in his limousine, so as long as they didn't kill us, I didn't care whether we got hit or dinged or whatever. And at least if you're sitting there in a limo at a red light or blocked traffic, you're not looking at the ass end of a dump truck. You know, it's a little bit more comfortable. So that's the way to go in New York, but I'm just looking at the traffic and the chaos and the noise and the people. And it's my 7th level of hell, as you know, to be in the middle of New York City.
It's gotten
everything. Worse. Well, and it's gotten worse, yeah.
In terms of driving around the city, it's never been worse.
Well, but I'm not even driving, walking, hanging from a light post, whatever the case may be. To be in a major city is my just horror. And I'm looking and I'm going, oh, geez, it takes so long to get anywhere here. And he's like, but pal, the city, it's nothing like it. You'd get used to it. You can eat anytime you want. You can go anywhere you want. There's always something going on. I said, that's the problem. But he likes that. And that's, so yes. And I think in recent years, in addition to the little place out in Greenwich, he's had some kind of penthouse apartment in Manhattan, or somewhere in New York. I don't know the geography. And also he had a place that for a while he was staying in Stamford when he didn't go all the way home to Greenwich, 12 miles away or whatever. So but then at the same time, the years in the late 90s that I was working for him, it was a rib that we talked about. At Christmas, we would get some form of relief, and that was until Raw started going live every week. We'd get a little relief because it was a tradition. He either 10 or 14 days, he would go to his place in Florida. And that was the holiday vacation that he and Linda and I guess Shane would go, or Stephanie would, depending on what their ages were, whatever. And so you'd have a little relief, right? Even though he'd still call, and he was working there, and he'd call people on the phone. But this, I never saw it, but it was described to me as a $10 million mansion in Florida that sat out on, I don't know whether it's down in the Fort Lauderdale area or wherever it was, but some ritzy South Miami, whatever. It sat out on one of those peninsulas, so you literally, the windows, you could see through this house, and there was ocean on 3 sides of it. And it's just this glorious place. And I said, well, what the? He only goes there 2 weeks a year. It's worth $10 million. It's this beautiful. I said, and I one time I said, why don't they rent it out? Well, then it wouldn't be available if he wanted to go. I thought, God damn it. And that's when I realized that this is a whole new level of, you know, if I had enough money to have a $10 million second home, you'd never see my fat white ass again. That's all I got to say.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in the cornydrivethrue@gmail.com from Casey. You've said on previous drive-thrus that rich weirdo Vince McMahon never took the time to sit down and enjoy a movie or TV show. So my question is, when you were working closely with Vince McMahon, did the rich weirdo ever listen to any music? And if so, who were his favorite artists?
Oh, God. I mean, you know, he would talk about musicians in conversation when it came up or applied or whatever. You know, there was, I'm sure, some spirited Elvis discussion when we were talking about Honky Tonk Man once or twice. But
was he a big Elvis fan?
No, I'm not saying he was a big Elvis fan. I'm just, you know, and then he'd start doing the impersonations and everything. Oh, hey, Elvis has left the building and all that stuff. He knew who these people were, the major names. I do also, I heard the story before I got there. It was one of the Summer Slams. Did they do a Summer Slam in Toronto?
Before you got there? I'm not sure about that. I don't know.
Back in the late 80s, 90s, whatever the point is, I don't know, but there was a Summer Slam where Bruce was always telling this story, and he told it in front of Vince, so it was true, in this case, from Bruce, that Joe Walsh, they could get Joe Walsh to do the national anthem, and of the Eagles, and fucking Joe Walsh. And Vince had no idea who that was, and he ended up getting somebody else that was like, that he knew who the fuck they were, and it was a bomb or some shit like that. But no, he knew who major entertainers were, but here's the thing. I can't imagine when he would have, I don't remember us turn the radio on in the car, because if we were in the car, we were talking about the TV that we were going to, or working in some kind of way. JR, everybody attests to that. Get your books out, guys. The only person who couldn't get his book out was whoever was driving. If you went to the office, if you got there at 9 o'clock, Vince was already in his office. The big executive office on the corner behind the, you know, Beth Zaza was his secretary there, and you'd turn right, and he was already there pretty much before everybody else, and he didn't leave until after everybody else. That's how Russo would sit there until 8:30 in the evening to catch Vince coming out of his office to pitch his shit. On a writing day, we'd get there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we wouldn't leave until fucking 7 o'clock at night, charitably, and there wasn't even a TV in that room. The radio was never on. And I know that he works out in the mornings, but maybe he listens to music when he works out, but he works out either in his home gym, or he'd sometimes come to the office in those days and work out at the gym there, but that would be in the morning before 9 o'clock. So when does the fucking guy, when would he ever watch television? On fucking taping days, he was one of the first ones in the building, and you wouldn't leave until the show was over. It's not like there were phones where you could watch television on your phone in those days. If there was a monitor in his office, so he could monitor the show that they were shooting that night, but not a television. I don't know when this fucking human being would ever have time to watch television.
And music, you never ever listen to music in the car?
No, because we'd always be talking. I remember listening to music with him when he would get samples or potential new music for new talents. I remember that.
What was that process like?
Well, just everyone, I mean, it wouldn't be like a regular thing, but I remember on several occasions, well, what do you think of this song? Or what do you think of this? They're working on this or whatever. But that would be that wasn't a regular thing. And that would be the only time that he didn't watch TV at the studio. He watched the monitor for whatever the fuck we were shooting at the studio or airing at the studio. That's literally what Vince did. If he was not traveling for work, he was at the office or he was working at home, and with a 2-hour workout at least once a day plus a long work day. And I mean, now maybe things are different when you can watch television anywhere now, but in those days, there was literally not time for him to watch television. And when we would leave on those writing days at 7:30, sometimes 8 o'clock at night, after we'd been there almost 12 hours or whatever, he had lunch. We'd gone to get lunch at the store down the road from his house, but he still hadn't had dinner, so he's going to have to eat dinner.
Would he go with you to the store?
Yeah, he'd drive. Fuck, yeah, come on, let's go get some lunch. Whenever we get to some type of stopping point, and we'd just pile in one of his vehicles, and he'd drive us down there, and he'd buy the fucking lunch, whether it me and Bruce or me and Shitstain or all of us, whatever, whoever was in the group. And we'd come back and eat it at the dining room table real quick, clean everything off, and get back to work. So he'd be eating the giant white meat turkey sandwich on white bread, but with just the barest bit of mustard to give it some flavor. And I'd be sitting there either eating a greasy cheeseburger or those chicken fingers that they made down there. I'd dip in fucking ranch, and he'd look at me like I was literally scooping shit into my mouth with my hands. And then we'd go back to work. There was no... If it was good weather, we'd sit out by the pool, and then you'd have to have a paperweight because the wind out there, but since they get so little good weather in Connecticut, he'd want to go out by his pool side. So we'd sit on the table out there, and he'd have something sitting on your book to keep the pages from blowing away, and something sitting on your formats and some pens and things and drinks set and talk about the same shit out at the pool, which was 50 feet from the dining room. That was as far as you would go, as far as getting away from work.
He wasn't always into steroids and bodybuilding. Did he ever say, like, while you were eating, oh, I used to eat that, or I haven't had a hamburger in years, but I used to love them? Anything?
No, he never put over. He would always talk about, food is fuel. He ate because it was necessary fuel, but he never put over that he used to fucking sneak. I mean, he has cheat things and guilty things, and he binges like. What the fuck was it? There's some things if he's...
Was it Oreos that he binges on?
I think something like that. But he'll, but it's very rare because that shows a lack of discipline, and then he treats himself by having whatever the fuck he might want and stuffing his face with it. But he doesn't, ever admit that he used to just sit around and eat French fries and have acne.
When it comes to the music, there have been some stories that at times when he tries to sell talent on a new gimmick and potentially new music, he'll do so by standing up and dancing and acting out how they could dance to their song. Did you ever see any Vince dancing, not besides the Too Cold Scorpio story, but whenever he was listening to potential new music, did he ever get up and move around?
Oh, yeah, because, the video of him doing Stand Back from the original Slammies or whatever, he loved doing shit like that. He doesn't think he's Tom Jones, but he's doing the Tom Jones shit because he will make fun of himself that way. He will do that. And they're, oh, look at Vince. He's being cool and making fun of himself. He likes that kind of thing. But yeah, every once in a while he would just briefly, as he was saying something, break into some demonstrative physical action to illustrate that or whatever. But it wasn't a habit. He wasn't just bopping down the fucking hallways like Lisa Simpson playing her fucking sax.
Well, Jim, our next question was sent in via email.
Dead puppies. Don't crack, Brian, don't crack.
At gmail.com from Blake D. The people at home have no idea why I'm laughing right now. Question from Mr. Cornett. Concerning the genetic jackhammer with balls the size of grapefruits, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. This question is concerning Vince McMahon and his former journey selling bodybuilding supplements. I've heard a rumor for many years, but I've never heard a wrestling talent or someone in the business address this. So my question is, I think he left that in is there any truth to the rumor that Vince McMahon buried 3 million gallons of unsold IcoPro behind Titan Tower? The IcoPro slogan was, "You gotta want it." if this is true, then apparently McMahon didn't want it.
No, you couldn't. Titan Tower doesn't like exist on Gilligan's Island where you can just go out in the backyard and dig a fucking hole. It is surrounded by the city of Stamford, Connecticut, and concrete and parking lots and buildings. There's no way to go out behind Titan Tower and bury any, especially millions of gallons of whatever. I don't know what kind of containers it came in, but no, I honestly, I don't know what they did with it. I remember hearing they had a bunch left over. That much is true, but I have no idea what they did with it or how they disposed of it. I still remember Vince McMahon eating ICA-Pro, what do they call them, power bars? The fucking thing, it's supposed to look like a candy bar, but it certainly doesn't taste like it. It's supposed to be healthy and give the bodybuilders protein. All in the 90s, all the guys had these power bars in their fucking bags, and they were eating them all the time, like they actually tasted good. That's what Vince would snack on when we were at his house and we were riding or whatever, and it was either not time to go to the little deli down the road to get the lunch sandwiches, or it was mid-afternoon. He'd bite into these goddamn ICA-Pro bars. And one time he said, well, here, try it, and it was like goddamn a chocolate-flavored roofing tile. But I don't know what they did with all that stuff, no. But in power bars, that's the thing, power bar, put penciled behind his ear and a power bar in his fucking mouth.
Okay, well,
I was eating Reese's cups.
Would he eat a power bar on the way to his barber to get his haircut while he's shaving his face? He
couldn't. That's two things he couldn't do. He couldn't either eat a power bar or fucking get a haircut while he was working at the same time as shaving his face. He couldn't do all those things at the same time. He could work and shave his face. He could work and eat a power bar. He could even work and get a haircut. But he couldn't do it more than two of those things at the same time.
Our next question sent to cornydrivethrue@gmail.com from Danny Brown. What do you think? FTR says in 2019 sometime Triple H said a big wave of change is coming. A little while later they said Vince wasn't well for several months. And that's around when he pitched that dumb parody gimmick. Do you think that when Triple H pitched them that, it was kind of saying Vince is on his way out? He doesn't look well, and now we have confirmation he wasn't for an extended period. Dude, I think we may lose Vince in 2022. What are your thoughts on any of this?
I don't know why you came up with 2022, but...
No, 2020...
Oh, 2020 also. And
by the way, the subject line, Triple H knows Vince is dying? Question.
Oh, for God's sake. Let's not get that started. Knowing all those individuals, it's not unheard of that if there was conversation in the family that, Vince wasn't feeling well and maybe he was going to cede more responsibility to Triple H, so Triple H would then try to give somebody the Iggy that, hey, just wait, changes are coming. And it could also be that he was just given that standard line because that's what you do when somebody's unhappy in the wrestling business. So I can't validate or shoot the holes out of either one of those theories, to be quite honest. But it seems like Triple H has tried to avoid just outright bullshitting people. He prefers, he lets like the Bruces of the world do that. So it doesn't seem like he would have bullshitted him unless something was going to happen, but that it may have been something else completely that we don't know about. And then they had an idea, and a week later they didn't have that idea anymore, because that happens all the fucking time.
We really haven't talked too much about this since the FTR interview. What did you think listening to them talk about their experience the last several years with WWE, Creative, Vince, Bruce, just that whole system? What did you think sitting back and hearing all that?
I think because of, it's a publicly traded company now, and all that, they've got human resources, or, everything goes through a variety of levels of corporate now. I think nobody will just come. If you worked for Ole Anderson, and you went in and said, hey, Ole, what the fuck? He would be honest with you. He'd either say, you know what? You guys have worked hard. I'm going to put the belts on you next week. Stick with me. I'll take care of you. And he'd do it. Or he'd say, you know what? I just don't like you guys. Or you haven't impressed me, or you've been here too long, or whatever. Maybe you need to go somewhere else. That was booking, and that was the wrestling business. You didn't yank a guy along because you didn't have to. They were yanking these guys along because they knew that they were going to be valuable against, you know, for the opposition against the people who some claim are really the best tag team in wrestling. I don't want to mention their names. We're trying to stay positive here. So they figure, well, we don't want to give these guys a fucking benefit, but we don't like tag team wrestling. We're not going to use them, so we're going to string them along. And they don't really figure it's stringing them along if they're offering them money, because it ain't actually their money out of their pocket. It's money out of the corporation's pocket. So if they're paying them a lot of money and then not letting them do anything, then they are less sympathetic because they're, well, you're making a lot of money. What the fuck? You're just complaining. Well, no. I just want to do something I'm happy fucking doing, motherfucker, so I'll go elsewhere. But that's the problem. Nobody has any balls, and there's not one person making all the decisions. Even Vince can't make every decision, even though Vince knows about anything of any importance, but he doesn't even actively tell guys or tell his people to lie to guys at that level. He really doesn't spend that much time on it. They're just bullshitting on their own because they don't want Vince to hear that they lost these two guys. Vince hears these two guys debuted for AEW, and he go, thought they were working for us. Who was in charge of that? And whether it would have been Laurinaitis, or it would have been Triple H, or it would have been Bruce, or whoever along that, then they would have had to get yelled at because they lost so-and-so to the opposition. That's why they don't want to do it. It's ridiculous in this day and age, but the point is they're not going to feature tag teams on top. They're just not. So anybody that wants to be a tag team should not fucking go there. And because every tag team that's gone there has been miserable or split up or wanted out.
It's not even about pushing a tag team on top. It's about treating a tag team division with respect. It doesn't have to be the main event.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying in a feature position on top. Not the actual main event of every show, although it's been proven time and time again that can draw, but it would take years now to reduce and eliminate the damage they've done to the perception of tag team wrestling in their company for it to ever mean anything, and they're not going to ever do that. But, no, you could, obviously, well, they're having enough trouble making a fucking star of any kind, single, tag team. You know, they've had better luck with the women. They've just come across better women that have helped them out quite a bit. They might have botched that up too, but you can't just keep making the tag teams meaningless and bottom of the card and the title not featured and etc. and, and ever draw any money with it. And so anybody who wants to be a tag team should not work for the WWF. Anderson and Gallows. Boy, as soon as they didn't have a fucking option, they fucking cut them loose. Don't even get me started on that. I would go to a motherfucker's house with a can of gasoline and a blowtorch if they talked me out of doing something that I wanted to do on the theory they were going to pay me $750,000 a year, and that lasted for 3 months, and they said, no, I changed my mind. They'd be changing their fucking address. But that's what I got to say about that.
All right. Well, let's get some more questions here on this positive edition of the Drive Thru.
All right, we've put off the inevitable long enough. Should we talk about some modern wrestling, specifically the weekly, and I say WEAKLY, weekly Wednesday Night Wars? Is it irony? What is it? Is it what I was talking about earlier with the people that are switching sides and they're anti what they're usually pro or pro what they're usually anti? Here's what we've got. From the WWE World Wrestling Entertainment, the undisputed industry leader in cartoon wrestling and bullshit, completely unbelievable cartoon bullshit modern wrestling, is now presenting on USA Network a show that, for all intents and purposes, is the most sports-based presentation of wrestling anywhere in the mainstream, at least, where all the guys are highly trained, highly conditioned, and are at least mostly serious about what they do. This comes from the company where the promoter, the owner of the whole thing, was the first one to actually admit that everything was bullshit. And on the other channel, the lifelong wrestling fan who promised a sports-based presentation has now gone full-blown community theater comedy improv. Isn't it supposed to be the other way around?
Supposed to be. I mean, he's doing community theater, the other one's doing Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Well, yeah, well, and the thing is, I'm wondering if anybody has mentioned to Vince what NXT is doing. He might have put a stop to it by now. They're too serious, pal.
He probably had to be reminded what it was.
I'm thinking they're doing this and hoping Vince doesn't notice. From what I saw from an eye for an eye, I mean, I don't think Vince knows that they're over here trying to actually be serious. Do you? In his current state, he's getting a lot of publicity about it.
He's getting a lot of publicity. I don't know how much of it you've seen. There's been a few different articles, a few different things about investors finally raising the alarms about the way things are being done. There was a big article in Variety I tweeted out.
Well, yeah, that one investment group did a pretty thorough investigation / indictment of if Vince keeps blaming creative. Well, who's creative? It's Vince, ultimately, and he's been doing it for 36 years now. If I was Vince, I'd say, fuck, please find me somebody else that can do this. 36 years?
Well, that's the thing. He keeps telling investors quarter after quarter that, you know, we need to create more stars, the storylines will be improving. They're not going to improve because it's him and Bruce Pritchard behind it. And Bruce Pritchard is just carrying out what he thinks Vince wants. It's such a broken system right now. And anyone you speak to in that company, off the record, will tell you it's a completely broken system. And anyone who leaves that company will,
on the record,
happily tell you it's a broken system. It's a broken system. And the part that's broken the most is Vince McMahon. He wants to work until he dies. Someone needs to tell him to stay home and just do something else.
Oh, God, I swear to God, I thought you were going to say somebody needs to tell him to die already.
No.
No, don't do that.
I'm not wishing death on him, but I think he definitely needs to find something else to do with his time. He is the person, the sole person holding WWE back right now, and it's going to hurt them because people are starting to notice. The investors are starting to notice that, you know what? If these ratings keep dropping, we're not going to be able to get a rights fee anywhere near what we got previously. And there's no sign of the ratings not continuing to drop because the program itself is so horrible across the board, Raw or SmackDown.
And the thing is, I don't recognize this Vince that I'm seeing from afar. The Vince McMahon that I knew, even that was 15 years into it instead of 36 years, but well, actually 9 years. 9 years through 15 years is when I was working closely with him. He knew how to get guys over. He didn't stop and start pushes. He knew how to pick talent for the most part. He had a better than average record. For every Mabel, there was a lot of stars. He went with too many big guys, but at least he went with them. There's things they're doing now that just violates any rule of getting talent over or pushing somebody or building a big match that I would have learned in large part from Vince, and they're not following it now. I knew the way territory bookers did things, but Vince had a whole different level of doing shit, and it worked for a while. And he's not doing the same thing. I'm not saying do the same things all the time, but the concepts remain the same. You do with different people in an updated way. He's not doing the fundamental same things that he used to do to build and create stars and get angles over. And I can see where he said, well, I just don't have the guys that look like the stars anymore. Nobody looks like Steve Austin and The Rock. but you've got some interesting looking guys, but unfortunately, most of the past several years, they've concentrated on these interchangeable fucking gymnasts. And the only thing that stands out is the really silly shit rather than the really awesome shit, because there ain't no really awesome shit.
I don't even think that's as much the problem as the actual storylines, the tone of the show, the commentator, just the entire presentation of Vince McMahon wrestling in 2020.
It
could be gymnasts, it could be big fat guys. It doesn't matter. It's the actual show and the product that is the problem.
It's clean and sanitized, has no edge to it, has no grit to it, has no credibility to it, is just movement over and over. Guys have been allowed to have all these matches where they do every fucking thing to each other, and most of the time it's the guys that weigh 170 pounds that are doing everything to each other. So when money-drawing talent does do something, the fucking underneath guys have done much more impressive-looking shit, which is something else. I mean, you know, this is when I first went up there was a sign on when you went through the gorilla position, no matching tights. He didn't want fucking opponents wearing the same color on television. Now you can't tell who the heel and who the babyface is, and they're doing all the same moves to each other.
But again, I don't even think that's as much the problem, other than Brock Lesnar. Of all the stuff we've watched over the last year or however long, who hasn't been involved in a wacky or stupid or badly scripted promo? A promo where they can't look at the camera? A promo where they look in a weird direction? Where they talk like human beings would never talk? Who hasn't been involved in an angle that's stupid? It's everything that made pro wrestling work has been dumbed down for an audience that isn't there. For an audience that is the audience of Vince McMahon. Did you see the Moxley quote this week?
I can't even wait to hear it.
Not one to defend Jon Moxley, because he has shown that Jon Moxley Unleashed is not exactly, in my eyes, the greatest professional wrestler. But his quote was, "I'll tell you what pressure is. Pressure is having a 2-page script written by a 74-year-old madman that makes no sense to you. That's gonna make you look stupid. And you're on worldwide TV, live, and you gotta memorize every single line and somehow try to pull it off and not look like a total jackass. That's pressure."
Yeah, that's pressure.
And that sums up the problem. They're being handed scripts written by Vince, supervised by Vince, that makes sense only to Vince, and it's not connecting with any audience right now. WWE.
Well, and say, here's another thing. You know what Vince doesn't have 36 years experience at? Writing scripts. There were no, until Shitstain came along, there was no such thing that was even referred to as a script. We wrote formats, and those formats contained bullet points. But now, and then they had the whole fucking wave of comedy writers in, so now, yeah, that would be a big fucking problem if Vince is sitting down and actually writing the fucking scripts that they shouldn't have himself and making them memorize them and word for word. Yeah, that's a big fucking problem because it's insane.
Remember when they first tried to push Roman Reigns as a babyface? And again, Roman Reigns was fantastic in the Shield, got over as the badass of the Shield. So of course when they make him a babyface, they have to dumb him down. The same way they did with the Ultimate Warrior. You know, even you can say whatever you want negative about the Ultimate Warrior. Diesel. All these guys that were kick-ass crazy men, all of a sudden were smiling, wearing sweaters, and hugging families. And Roman Reigns did that promo that one time where he's like, "This suffering succotash." I mean, it was a line that was written by Vince.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And no one wants to hear a babyface say. I mean, that's the problem. I feel bad for Roman Reigns, because Roman Reigns, his push as a babyface got screwed up because it became, and everyone knew it, Vince wanting to push him as the top babyface. And it was an unnatural feeling, an unnatural push. It didn't work right. But the problem right now with WWE, and it's been this way for a while, but more people are becoming conscious of it, is Vince McMahon. He is the problem. I don't know what the solution is, but he is the problem.
Well, so time takes care of all these things. If that's the nicest way of saying it that I can possibly imagine. I don't wish ill on Vince, but he will never quit. He will never retire. So time takes care of these things.
Our next question, we have time for a couple more. was sent to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com from Chris Sweeney in Glasgow, Scotland. I was reading about the infamous Vince and Nails altercation, where Vince was attacked in his office by Nails while the Berserker watched the door. According to Shane Douglas, Vince no longer has meetings with wrestlers alone, as Shane was going to Vince's office to punch his teeth down his throat, in quotes, and the room was full of guys, and it's been that way ever since Nails. What do you know about this? Any info on the whole Nails incident and aftermath? Do you think Vince could handle himself if needed to?
Well, Vince couldn't have handled himself against Nails at that particular point. I don't think, because Nails had him by a significant height and a significant weight advantage, and also was a lunatic. But no, my apologies to Shane, but no, it hasn't been that way. Maybe it just, I hesitate to say this, but maybe Vince just didn't think that Shane was worthy of a one-on-one meeting. And considering most of Vince's thoughts of Shane Douglas, I would think that would probably be closer to the truth than anything else. I've seen Vince have one-on-one meetings with, Nails was what, 91, 92? I was 92. There from, okay, I was there from 93 to 99 and worked for the company longer, but wasn't watching Vince have meetings. He had tons of one-on-one meetings. Sometimes, the old joke where the guys would wait out in the hallway in a line to talk to Vince was true, because everybody at TV knew that was their chance to talk to Vince. Vince was going to be at TV. They were going to see him there or at Madison Square Garden, and it was hard to get Vince's attention at the Garden. So that was the rib. After the production meeting, Vince would go to his office, and there would be a line of wrestlers standing waiting to get some time with him, however much time that might be. What one of the recently departed said, he wasn't going to spend 3 hours standing in a hallway to talk to, Vince McMahon, right? But that's the way the guys got to talk to him. If Vince was in the middle of something and somebody knocked on the door and Vince had Jerry Briscoe or Pat Patterson or Jim Ross or Bruce Pritchard or whoever the fuck was in there, if it was somebody that was only going to pitch something or that Vince was going to give a few minutes of his time to out of courtesy and mostly nothing else, then those people were not going to leave that room because they were involved in something that was ongoing. If it was a top guy, Undertaker, Bret Hart, Steve Austin, I could go on, that this conversation was either going to be a little more challenging or a little more meaningful or a little longer or whatever, or a little more sensitive, then Vince would tell whoever, give me some time, and he would sit and talk with that person, or he might keep Jim Ross or Jerry Briscoe or Pat Patterson if they were germane to the topic of the conversation, such as the pay-per-view finish or the contract, JR's and talent relations, or the fucking agent of this thing we're going to do on TV or whatever. But no, there was never any statement made, word out, rule instituted, or scuttlebutt amongst all of us that no, we're not allowed to leave Vince alone with any of the talent anymore. That's ridiculous. And be quite honest, let's see, 25 years ago, if I was Jackie Fargo, I'd say Shane Douglas versus Vince McMahon, 6-5, you pick it.
I see. Everyone always acts like Vince is Mr. Tough Guy. Vince could have handled himself with all the boys.
I didn't say all the boys. I'm saying Vince was bigger, Vince was heavier, Vince was jacked up, and fucking Shane may have been madder, but I'd like to have seen that. Because I'm sorry, but I wasn't aware that Shane Douglas was a member of the Gracie family.
That's a good point. That's a good.
I did Barry Horowitz versus Vince. I'd have 6-5 on that one too. This was 25 years ago. Vince was in his late 40s and fucking jacked to the gills. So I'm now.
But jack doesn't mean you could throw a punch, and jack doesn't mean you could take a punch.
Well, no, and neither does being a mad fucking pro wrestler from Pittsburgh. It mean you can do either one of those things either. I'm just saying it's not like if it had been Steve Blackman going in, I'd say we need to call some people to help Vince out.
Our next question sent to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com.
And that's not being disrespectful to Shane as a pro wrestler either, because I have a feeling that unless Ricky Morton particularly got a finger in his fucking eye socket, that Vince could have probably taken Ricky in a shoot also. Having fucking at 6 or 7 inches and fucking 40 or 50 pounds on him, but but that nevertheless.
Let's get our next question here, Jim. This was sent to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com from John Smirka in Masontown, West Virginia.
Oh, so he's smirking at us, eh?
I remember several years ago, Vince taking part in a question and answer panel with fans on the WWE Network. He was asked what his favorite style of wrestling was, and his answer shocked me. He said he could watch Fit Finlay and William Regal wrestle all day. Is this true, or was he ribbing the fans? If it's true, then why have we endured so much crap wrestling over the years?
I think that, first of all, who do you say Fit and who?
William Regal.
Fit and I don't know that he's ever sat and watched them wrestle all day. If he booked the match in his company, he watched that, but I don't know if he watched it more than once. I think that's something that Vince either would like to be true, that's why he said it, or wants people to think that it's true, which is why he said it. But if you asked him to elaborate, he'd probably say, but that's just for folks like us that like the true sport of wrestling, but of course it won't sell. Or something like that. That's what he'd follow it up with. So, no, that is totally not the kind of wrestling that he's always had the vision of. But in his mind at that point, that was the answer that he wanted to give. That, like I said, for either he wants it to be true, that's the kind of wrestling that deep down he really likes, but of course he sees that he could never sell it. So that's why he has to make all these concessions, or he thought that was the answer that sounded best to the audience that he had.
The style of wrestling that WWE produces, do you think it's the style of wrestling Vince likes, or just the style of wrestling that he truly believes would do the best business-wise?
Well, see, both. He doesn't want to admit it, especially to an audience of hardcore fans, because who else is going to be on the network, right? This is not just a guy down at the mall that just wants to see the fucking Austin and the beer truck. So, of course, they want to hear him say that. But I think he would like that to be true, that he, really likes that, and it comes back to him having the genetic jackhammer, having the balls of steel, being a, man's man. He would almost say it like reverently when I remember when I was a kid and you'd watch so-and-so and he'd shoot the half. That's a Vince expression also, like shoot a half Nelson to turn the guy over to pin him. It's an amateur wrestling thing. He'd shoot the half and he'd hook the guy and do this and do that. But he never made any attempt at promoting wrestling, anything like that. Even when his father was still alive and still the head of the company and he was an announcer, they weren't promoting the WWF had some of the hokiest wrestling in some cases in the country before Vince Jr. came along and got in charge. So they never promoted that, but it is what it is.
Your time around Vince, was there ever a match that he raved about? I mean, was there ever something that you watched and you said, wow, Vince really loves this. This may be his favorite match?
No, he never. I mean, every once in a while he might recall or bring up a match from the past. It wouldn't be in the context of, wow, I remember that as being a great match. It would be in the context of that, of the business aspect of that match, or something we did there that might work similarly here, or this drew that amount, but not just, wow, that was a great match that I watched as a fan and really enjoyed it, and it's not applicable to what we're talking about here, but golly, I really liked it. No, you never,
Well, not that, but just...
And he liked matches at the time he saw them. He would always praise guys if they had a good match on pay-per-view. He'd never see that match again. He would, unless it was for some type of television production. I can't imagine that there's ever a match that Vince has gone back and watched again just to see it. it would have to, if he sees something back from the past, it's because of a television or video project that they're working on. So it's not like he ever, I've said he absolutely, and this has been borne out other places, and he's told other people this, that they're now revealing in these interviews. He never watched anybody else's wrestling but his own, and he never really rewatched his own except for work. And then, you know, he had his writing team. We would go through the shows and pick out, you know, things that needed to be VTR'd or just write in the format package. And the folks at the studio would take care of recapping in a minute and a half what went on in that particular segment. So, you know, he's seeing it as it's going out on television is the only time he's ever seen anything again. So he puts guys' matches over, but that's at that point.
Do you think Vince is a fan of wrestling?
No, he's a fan of selling tickets to wrestling. And he, remember the quote in one of Bill Apter's magazines in 1986 when he actually did a legitimate interview with Vince, and
Larry
Vince said,
King. It was a Larry King interview.
It was the Larry King interview. But it was a legitimate interview transcript, and he said, "I want to be the Walt Disney of wrestling." And that's what, you know. Walt Disney didn't have the most realistic mice, but they sure made the most money off of them. So he's always been about selling the sizzle, not the steak.
But they also don't break kayfabe once you enter the world of Walt Disney World.
Well, that's true. You know, you can tackle one of those fucking mice and kick the shit out of him. He won't take his fucking head off.
I don't know if they still do it, but for years when they hired a executive or a senior executive, they spent a day in Disney World in one of the outfits, so they understood what that was like.
I'd have to make sure I got that job first before I put that.
This question was sent in the corny drive-thru at gmail.com from Chevy from the island.
Chevy, Chevy, I love when you fall down each Saturday night on my TV. Oh, but Chevy, every time that you fall down, I know that you are falling for me. Jane Curtin, Gilda Radner. Who else was in
Lorraine
on that?
Newman. Lorraine Newman. And the funny thing is, they all hated him when they were singing that because he was such a prick to everybody. But here's a question from Chevy from the island. Dear Jim, was Vince right? We all have heard that Vince has lost it, and when it comes to the storylines on Raw and SmackDown, he definitely has lost it. But Jim, when it comes to the wrestlers and their place on the card, does Vince know talent? Outside of FTR, no other ex-WWE wrestler's place on the card has changed since going to AEW. Jon Moxley was always at the top of the card, and just like his time in WWE, I still find him boring. Mr. Brody Lee, or Birdie Lee as he put it here, Mr. Birdie Lee is still a boring mid-card wrestler. Miro debuted as a mid-card talent. Sean Spears is still an underneath guy. Just a few examples. So is Vince right? Because if Tony Khan has them in the same place, then why does everyone make it seem like Vince is out of touch with talent placement?
Well, I don't know if one has to do with the other. Those guys would be it wasn't hard to figure out to use Jon Moxley in the main event because you paid that much money for him, and he is an ex-WWE star and has mainstream television. But as far as the rest of them, I don't know if they're in the same place in AEW or if they're worse off. Because they sure got more out of old Miro in the WWE from what I'm seeing than they are in AEW. You've seen him. You would concur with that. You saw more of him in the WWE than I did, right? I don't see a lot of these guys holding their position that they had in the WWE, except for FTR, which, yeah, they're featuring them, but goddamn, they're featuring them in such a stupid convoluted way. Are they baby faces? Are they heels? The guys that everybody was wanting them to see, wanting to see them against, the Young Bucks, are now whiny, bitchy, fucking smart-ass heels, right when they actually have a heel team come in to work with them, and they need to be baby faces. They were baby faces before. Vince does know talent. As we just talked about earlier, Vince wanted to push Roman Reigns. Problem is, he was stubborn and wanted to push him as his top babyface instead of letting the people get to like him by making him a heel first and making them not like him, and then switching him. And then because Vince does not know talent in all cases, because he has what is it? Is it he doesn't see some guys like Bryan Danielson as a top guy because of the lack of size and or over-the-top personality. But at the same time, there are exceptions to the rule. I'm the same way in a lot of cases. This group of grade schoolers, in modern-day wrestling, does not intimidate or inspire anybody to fucking go, wow, look at that guy. But when you've got a guy like Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan, that was so good in the ring, was that even though he wasn't very tall, he had the body for his height, and he could perform, and the people saw that he was getting the raw end of the stick, and so they hijacked the whole show in his behalf. Vince has a problem using some guys like that. Vince never saw anything in Chris Candido, which to me, I don't care if he was 5'6". He also could out bench press 80% of the fucking locker room. So, yes, Vince knows talent better than Tony Khan does. That's why he's got most of it. And as far as using them better, it depends on what Vince's personal picadillos are. But I think while Vince's track record is not as good as it used to be with picking and using talent, the right talent in the right way, it's still, unfortunately, a whole lot better than the option. If you want to talk about not only recognizing talent, but using it to the best of your ability, then you have to go to a Ring of Honor or a smaller company, ECW. Look at the fucking guys Paul Lee had when everybody was saying, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world. It was smoke and mirrors. He got fucking Public Enemy over, for God's sake. He knew how to get the most out of the least, and with the smaller companies, that's what you have to do, because you have no choice. You can identify all the stars in wrestling, but you can't afford a lot of them, so you have to make your own. But Vince is still winning in the contest of who picks better talent, but it's not anything to write home about like it used to be, and only because the opposition is so shitty at it.
Who do you see in AEW that has not formerly been in the WWE that you think Vince would see and think, that's a talent, I want that guy?
I can't imagine he couldn't see what's going on with MJF. I can't imagine he couldn't see that. I think probably the way that MJF circumvented the WWE and any of its system and got to where he is right now is just because he had an MLW contract that prevented him from going anywhere else, but from when he was nobody. And then the timing was right that it was up right when this new company was forming. And that's great because he gets to go and be more of himself than he would have at this stage of the game had he gone to the WWE. Of course, he also has to work with some of the, these goddamn guys that they've just hauled in out of fucking wrestling school. But there's trade-offs with everything. But I'd have to think he'd recognize MJF. God, who, see, that's the thing is Vince, I'm sure, has not seen anybody in AEW that has not worked for him previously, because he doesn't watch any other wrestling. I wish somebody would show him some of these things, and I wish somebody would record. Talk about people paying to see me watch this show on the internet. I'd pay to see Vince McMahon watch any of these AEW matches and just to see his reaction. I don't know whether it'd be laughing, head shaking, anger, what it would be, but he would I can guarantee you that if Vince McMahon watched the AEW television program religiously every week, he would stop offering guys more money not to go there. I can say that without fear of contradiction. The Vince McMahon that I knew, at least. Bruce would be right there going, "See, Vince, fuck him, let him go. They'll put him in the ring with this fucking midget clown too." And they probably would.
Well, Jim, there are many topics that have come in this week that apparently are very popular because so many people have sent them in. Let's try to get through a bunch of these. This next one was sent in the cornydrivethrough@gmail.com from Peter Sutherland in Surrey, United Kingdom. Hello, Jim. Hope you are well, with a question
Hello,
mark.
Peter. Hope you are well, too.
But he had a question mark there. Hope you are well?
Well, in that case, I take my statement back and just ask the question, are you well?
I wondered if you had any thoughts on the announcement during the WWE's Q3 investors call that Netflix and WWE Studios have combined to produce a fly-on-the-wall documentary series following Vince McMahon. Surely, if done properly, this could be the most important documentary series in the history of wrestling. Also, will you be tuning into the show? Kind regards. Once again, it's Peter from Surrey.
So they're not doing a documentary on Vince McMahon as far as a documentary on his life and career. They are doing a documentary series where they follow him around presently, current day.
This email is actually the first I had heard of that. I knew they were doing a documentary series.
Well, which is it? That's what I'm trying to answer. I need to know these things.
I will look into it.
As Vince McMahon used to say to me many times, you can't make a decision in a vacuum. You need to have all the information. So give me the information.
I'm looking right now for the information.
You're looking.
Hold on, let's see what this has.
Because I'll just jump ahead and say that if it's a documentary series following him around day to day right now, I think morbid curiosity would be the only reason I'd want to fucking... I'd even rather watch if they'd have done something like that. Of course, he would have never allowed it, and I would have been hot about it at the time. But if they'd have done something like that just for me 20 or 25 years ago, that would have been some classic video. To follow him around all day, every day back then. Right now, I'm not so sure, not only with the product and the state it's in, but also from the last several times I've seen Vince on television, he doesn't appear to have as much vigor as he used to, and I don't want him to potentially come off less than the otherworldly being that we all came to know, love, and sometimes hate.
I'm not seeing anything about fly on the wall. What I have seen here, WWE President Nick Khan announced a multi-part Vince McMahon documentary has been sold to Netflix with WWE and Bill Simmons as executive producers. The series is one of Netflix's most expensive of the documentary. On the documentary side, no release date was noted.
Okay, well, that sounds like just a regular documentary.
And that means it'll be completely full of shit.
Well, and I was about to say, now I would love to see a documentary on Vince McMahon, but I'm not sure I want to see the documentary on Vince McMahon that the WWE will approve.
Or Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons was behind that Andre the Giant documentary. He was behind that Andre the Giant one, which I know a lot of people really liked it. But again, they had that, what was his name, Shoemaker? They had that kid in there they were pretending was a wrestling historian. He either didn't know what he was talking about, so he started making things up, or was just lying. I think he didn't know what he was talking about, so he's making things up. He's the one who said Andre the Giant, as a heel attraction, went to the different territories, and the top babyface would wrestle him.
Yes, I remember that. And we're all going, when they credit him as being a wrestling historian or wrestling expert or whatever, we're like, who? We've never heard of his name before.
Yeah, all the wrestling historians were saying, what?
Well, yeah, but Simmons aside, isn't that, I know NFL Films had a degree of autonomy, to present the good and the bad, but still overall NFL Films pretty much glorified the NFL, did it not? I don't.
It did.
So I don't really see how you can look forward to an independent look at Vince McMahon from a wholly owned subsidiary of the company that he owns to look at the life. I'm going to be interested in seeing it, see what they do. You may be interested in seeing it to see what they don't do and that you can take apart, because I'm factually minded also. But if they come up with some cool old shit that we might not have seen before, video, things like that, I like to watch stuff like that. And I honestly, will everyone know pretty much if the WWE is doing it, not to take it as gospel truth, because they'll say, Vince's superior business acumen, transformed a smoky bingo parlor wrestling into a major multi-billion-dollar attraction and all that stuff.
He didn't try to put anyone out of business. He just wanted to compete. He didn't ask any wrestlers to no-show and walk out. He wanted everyone to give notice and do things the right way.
He certainly did. Whenever they were leaving the WWF, he wanted them to give notice and do things the right way.
That's the thing. If you were going to do a documentary on Vince, you can't ignore all the negative stuff, and there's so much of it. For any good thing you want to say about him, he did, using predatory business practices, go after every single other wrestling promoter, every wrestling magazine, anyone who was doing business in the world of wrestling. He went after them. I just found in the Norm Kietzer files, Norm Keitzer's correspondence about all of this, and how Vince Jr. told him, if you cover any other wrestling promotion except for mine, you can't have any access anymore. We're done doing business with you. And then Norm Kietzer called Vince Sr., who had been his contact for years, and Vince Sr. said, no, don't listen to him, don't listen to him. And it's exactly what happened. So, I mean, you got to talk about all that. You got to talk about him.
And by the way, let's just, you've run across that very quickly. For the younger folks in the audience, Norm Kietzer, Pro Wrestling Enterprises, the Wrestling News Magazine, etc., had been doing the arena programs for the WWF, the Philly Spectrum, Baltimore Civic Center, Madison Square Garden, and, all points around the horn for since at least the late 70s.
No, mid-70s.
Mid-70s, okay.
Mid-70s until 83.
And actually had their own, a wholly WWF version of the Wrestling News Magazine for them to sell in the arenas there, but he didn't want Norman to cover anybody else in the world of wrestling in order to get access to do all the things that he had been doing for his father for so many years.
And by the way, I guess we'll answer this now. I couldn't believe we got questions about this. You made a reference quickly to Mankato, Minnesota.
Yes,
a couple weeks ago. And a bunch of people said, why did you bring that up? That's where Pro Wrestling Enterprises, for the most part, was headquartered. Norman was also in New York and various other places. But it happened to him. Vince McMahon tried to hire Bill Apter, tried to hire George Napolitano. When that didn't go the way he wanted, they were banned from ringside. He brought Jeff Walton in to run his magazine. That didn't last too long. He was not just going after the promoters and the promotions. He wanted to own everything. And the first battle was in 83 against the magazines.
So there you have it.
So that has to be covered. Him messing with Crockett Promotions on pay-per-view. How do you
I have a feeling, unless it's a goddamn 18-part documentary of 2-hour episodes apiece, they're not gonna cover his war against the wrestling magazines.
Okay, well, what about Black Saturday? Because the previous version WWE put out there in one of their McMahon documentaries, Shane McMahon was saying how Vince did this and the ratings went up and they were doing great and Ted Turner wanted to be a part of it. So we had to get away from there, which is a complete bastardization of the reality, which was the ratings went into the toilet. People wanted Gordon Solie back.
They had more calls and complaints to TBS about taking away their quote-unquote Gordon Solie wrestling than they did about any other programming decision ever made before or since in the history of Turner Network Television.
To the point where Ted Turner brought Bill Watts onto the station, gave him Sunday nights, quickly became the highest-rated show in cable television, put Ole Anderson on Saturday mornings, and, Vince McMahon was about to get kicked off that network until Jim Barnett brokered the deal where Jim Crockett Jr. paid $1 million to the TBS time slot, which ended the talks with Ted Turner and Bill Watts, brought Ole Anderson back into the fold. That funded WrestleMania because Vince was out of money. There was no more money. Between that and the New Japan deal, that funded WrestleMania. So, that in a sense has to be talked about because it's all about Vince gambling on himself and all the usual crap.
They're not going to talk about that.
There's various books right now in production about Vince McMahon and the WWE. And the WWE has a list of people that the people writing the books are not allowed to talk to. And at the top of the list is Dr. D. David Schultz.
I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. How do you ignore the Rita Chatterton thing? How do you ignore the 92 scandals? How do you ignore so many different things, which they're about to do? We'll find out very briefly. They're about to do
I'm just saying, the reason why I say they're not going to cover those things is because they're not going to delve that, and maybe I'm going to be wrong. We shall see. But they're not going to delve that deeply into any wrestling history. They are going to quickly gloss over whatever happened before 1983 and primarily concentrate on what Vince's father had done with the WWF, barely acknowledge that other promotions ever gave them a run for their money or exceeded their business in some places, and then start with what Vince did with his father's small company that was making a fortune and how he built it up into a global sports entertainment juggernaut.
His father's company.
I'm guaranteeing you there will be very little.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right.
History.
I guarantee you're right. I guarantee we're going to have to do a whole show debunking everything that's on there. And it's going to be the whole, he put all of his money down and he bought his dad's company, not his father gave him a sweetheart deal and he paid for the company out of the company's profits because he took over the company in 82 and then he had 1 year to pay off in installments the partners of Capital Wrestling, and he did so out of the profits of this company that was making tens of millions of dollars a year at least.
Well, it was grossing over that. It wasn't making that. Some people say, well, making means profit. It wasn't making a profit of tens of millions, but it was grossing that. It was grossing more than, because it was the Northeast Population Center, so it was always the biggest grossing territory. But yes, you are correct in that he paid for it out of the, it was already an ongoing business. All he had to do was not cancel anything that was happening, and it was going to pay for itself. And that's not even diminishing what Vince has done since then, because yes, he made a lot of money and he did a lot of things right. Most of it did not involve the wrestling product, but it involved picking the right people to work for him and in the office as far as the merchandising and the licensing and all the et cetera. He went overboard in recent years with hiring people with not only no knowledge of, no background in wrestling, probably had never seen it before, to the point where there's sometimes a disconnect between what they actually do and most of the people working in the company. But while, it's classic example of he even said, he sells sizzle, not steak. His wrestling has never been the greatest in the world, but he's made more money at it because he picked the right people in business decisions of who to do these things. And every other promoter, whether it was Jim Crockett keeping his same front office staff in the the office on Briar Bend Drive and them just being outmanned and it went too fast for them, or whether it was the ludicrous management of Eric Bischoff in the 90s, where he lucked into it and then lost it because he was paying everybody like a drunken sailor and making all those screwy deals, and half the company or half the Turner umbrella didn't want the wrestling company there to begin with, so everybody wasn't pulling the same rope. Or whether it's in modern times, vanity projects by billionaires' kids and hire everybody that he likes personally instead of people that have experience in the things they're supposed to be doing. That's why Vince has, yes, I'm not saying that he didn't ever have Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, but many times over the last 30 years and more now, Vince has won these battles because he was just in business better, not because he had better wrestling. But they will, and part of that is history is written by the victors, and they will continue to misrepresent. This is another example of like a Hulk Hogan book, isn't it? Where the truth is impressive enough. Do you have to lie about shit when you were already the biggest box office attraction at one point in the business? Do you have to tell people that you worked 450 days or 500 days a year, because when you were in Japan and the United States at the same time, you'd fly across the, this was actually in Hulk Hogan's book. He would fly across the international date line from here to Japan so that he would actually work twice in 2 different countries in the same day. And he worked 500 times a year or whatever. Point is, ignoring the fact that if he flew back the opposite direction, he'd lose the day he just gained, so it doesn't make any sense on the face of it. But the truth should be impressive enough. He won, but they can't even tell it correctly and with accuracy on all sides.
Yeah, they won't. It'll be a big lie. It'll be
Oh no!
Ted Turner was obsessed with me. He just wanted to put me out of business. Never heard Ted Turner say Vince McMahon's name ever.
He did a couple times on the phone. Hey Vince, I'm in the wrestling business. That's I think that's what it's like. It's like Trump being jealous of Obama and wanting to erase everything he did, because I think it pissed Vince off that bad. I'm in the wrestling business too now. We got to address it. Vince McMahon had so much makeup on, he looked like one of the Twilight Zone characters, where you start pounding on his, in House of Wax, pounding on his face, and it's going to crack. And for some reason, his eyebrows resembled Mark Leonard in the episode where he played Spock's father in Star Trek.
Uncle Leo on Seinfeld.
Uncle Leo on Seinfeld, but if Uncle Leo was from the planet Vulcan.
Did you see what Jeremy Bagley tweeted out?
No, I didn't.
I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but it looks like The Undertaker's last act in WWE was the taxidermy Vince.
Oh, my God. And I mean, he's smaller, and he was being gracious, Vince, but he's aged. It wasn't a commanding performance like the days of old, where he commanded your attention and he commanded the ring, and you could tell he had full, control of everybody and everything in his palm of his hand, from the cadence of his voice to the way that, it ain't there anymore, is it? He looks like Vince Sr.
No, he looks worse than Vince Sr. Vince Sr. was younger when he passed away.
But I was about to say, Vince looks now like Vince Sr. looked when he was in his mid-50s. So, I mean, Vince has definitely taken much better care of himself and genetics and whatever the fuck else, but it's finally happening eventually.
He looked really bad, and the makeup was just bizarre looking at his face, and, I'd focus on a different thing, like, okay, his eyebrows, what the hell's going on there? And then, is he wearing lipstick? Or is it everything around his lips that make his lips look like, he looked really bizarre. His hair dye, just everything, and his voice is obviously shot. It's been a slow thing that we've seen happen over the years, but at this point his voice is gone, and I hate to say it, but I keep thinking this is the guy running the creative show now there. We all think of Vince McMahon. If you don't see him, you think of one thing, but when you see him and you see him like this, and he's a shriveled up old man, it didn't have the impact that I think he wanted it to have.
I wish Vince would get more rest. I really do.
Did you see the bags under his eyes? I've never noticed it before, but the makeup made it really pop out, especially when he turned to the side. Massive bags under his eyes.
That's what I'm afraid. I don't know. I hadn't been around him in ages on a regular and personal basis, but I'm afraid he's still trying to keep the same kind of schedule as he did 20 years ago, now that he's in his mid-70s. And I wish he'd just rest and relax every once in a while. It made me feel bad. That's all I got, bro. This is your show.
All right, well, let's get to some questions finally. It's only been 45 minutes.
How much longer can we go without having to talk about anything going on in the modern world?
Well, this first question was sent to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com from Zishan in Karachi, Pakistan. Why is Vince McMahon insistent on scripted promos when he himself knows that the best promos wrestlers did were not scripted by him or anyone else? Case in point, Austin 316, or If You Smell What The Rock Is Cooking. etc. Plus, it also robs the wrestler of his personality.
Well, I agree with all of that. And Vince knew that 20, 25 years ago, and it wasn't like that one day he just suddenly changed his mind. We've forgotten this was a process. The whole idea of exchanging is still until myself and Bruce Pritchard were both off creative and Shitstain and Ferrara took over. And well, they didn't take over because it was Vince's crew. But when Vince started the nucleus of them writing the shows, that's the first time that non-wrestling people had been allowed to be his creative team. There may have been one on a team at some point in time. I don't know, but I can't even call that person's name. But non-wrestling people, and then they do it for a while, and then, you know, when they leave and go to WCW, then he's getting. Meanwhile, he's had a few other people filter in there. He's went the direction of Stephanie, who had just graduated college. So, well, let's make her the head of creative. And that's not even a knock on Stephanie. I just don't see how, you know, that wouldn't have happened without her proper last name, that she would suddenly take over creative when I can't remember what she studied in college, but I don't even think it was writing, was it? She just was around now. But anyway,
I believe it was botany.
Botany. There you go. And then, of course, she wants it to be a television company and starts hiring not only, you know, TV writers, but non-wrestling people who have degrees in these things. And Vince is still at that time knew the top guys that can talk and have personalities. You let them do their thing, but gradually it started from the bottom up. Well, the fucking underneath guys will script this stuff because Vince doesn't care anyway. It's not that he doesn't care whether the guy lives or dies, but he doesn't care what. I guarantee you during the Attitude Era, it was very difficult to get Vince McMahon to listen to what fucking Kai and Tai might be going to do on the program. As long as the, you know, pay-per-view was getting sold and the main event stars were taken care of, he'd let other people fill that shit in. So then it started gradually as it was never a thing that we did in OVW developmental, but as they started their own developmental, that was a thing. They started training guys that here's your script. And they started even letting guys call it a script. I used to threaten guys with fines if they called a television format in the wrestling industry a script. And it was a slow, it like crept up like fungus grows. And also it was aided by so many more guys getting in the business and not having any fucking personality. Because we hit the fucking trained monkey era where everybody wanted to be the flying Walindas on the trapeze and get into business to do cool moves in front of their friends in the rec center. And though, so they need to be told what to say. Some of them on NXT still obviously need to be told what to say. So it just took over. It took years and years, but that's kind of the way it happened. The conditions just got right, that people outside wrestling were given for the first time creative positions within it, and then it was fostered by the new younger generation of McMahons thinking that they were, you know, they're going to be a big television company and not just wrestling anymore. And then a bunch of colorless jack-offs that want to get into business that can't tell a goddamn story to save their life and sit on their phone and fucking noodle all day instead of fucking figuring out how to get themselves over as some kind of personality. And then they pay the writers a lot of money, so they got to justify their existence, and that's how it happened.
How much of it do you think is a control thing from Vince?
Well, at this point, he probably is, instead of that, he's probably going, God, I wish I had guys like Hulk. You know, they could really just take this shit and run with it. You know, he probably wants somebody to come out there and fucking do better shit than is written for him. but it still needs to, be within the parameters of what Vince wants, and that's, that used to be a great thing. It's the same thing Austin did. The same thing all those guys did. But now I don't know what he wants. Maybe he don't know what he wants. And none of these guys look like, for the most part, they can give it to him. Damian Priest, could probably fucking cut loose and be something. But the rest of it, Vince probably looks like, God damn, what am I running here? Make-A-Wish?
Did anyone ever say anything to you when you were up there about what it was like when they were doing Saturday night's main event on NBC? Because those were, I believe, scripted promos that were on that show, which was obviously produced by Dick Ebersol.
Yes.
Was anything ever said to you about that?
Well, yeah, and Bruce did a lot of those. Or produced, stuff for a lot of those, or was involved as Brother Love or whatever. And hey, they liked that shit because it was network TV and blah, blah, blah. And I guess NBC was not going to let just a bunch of fucking wrestlers make shit up. I think they even have run-throughs of Saturday Night Live and still get shit by, right? But they always liked it that way because it was real television, network TV, and, blah, blah, blah. It's always the direction that Bruce loved that kind of shit. They wanted the show business. I wanted the wrestling and just, broadcast it to a wide audience. They wanted the show business.
Speaking of Vince McMahon, our next question sent to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com from Denny in Birmingham, England. I noticed your last comments on Vince McMahon's appearance on Survivor Series, but neither you or Brian mentioned the blatant plastic surgery Vince has had. He looked weird because he didn't look natural. My question is, Jim, do you know, other than Buff Bagwell's ridiculous calf implants, do you know of any of the boys that took plastic surgery or cosmetic alteration to make them look better? By the way, Vince McMahon was clearly plastic surgeryed up. Not makeup boy, what is this? Not makeup boy hundreds of thousands of dollars on plastic surgery, but I'm surprised you guys didn't mention it.
Well, I'm not an expert, so I was struck, impressed. It made an impression on me of how much makeup he was wearing, and that he seems to have lost a little oomph in his face, and he looks more like his dad did, even though it's taken him, 20 years longer to get there, and just wasn't a commanding presence like he used to be. What would he have had plastic surgery on? Maybe his eyes, but it's not. He still has wrinkles, so it doesn't look like that cat woman that try to get transformed into a cat or whatever. What do you think he's had worked on?
I don't know. There's clearly a lot going on with his face right now.
Well, because I hadn't seen him in years, and then I saw him. I don't know, people age. He's 75 or whatever. I don't know what he has had or would have had worked on.
He really looks like. It's funny this happened. He really looks like that puppet on Firefly Funhouse. He's literally turned into that. That's what he looks like now.
I don't remember anybody else. Maybe it's because in wrestling, nobody ever stayed in the public eye this long. Can you think of another big star, major? Because I consider
Chris
Vince
Jericho.
A star in wrestling. Well, God damn it,
Jericho.
no.
He's got Botox forehead.
But you don't know where I was going.
Oh.
With that, we've seen a bunch of people become past their prime expiration date canned hams of the world, as poor Chris is now. But I'm talking about, has any major wrestling star ever still been on television and, involved in some way when they were actually as 75 and had changed so much and had transformed? That's what I'm trying to think of. Vince has had more longevity than just about anybody.
Well, there have been guys.
Lawler's only 5 years younger than Vince is, but Lawler's Lawler. I'm sure he's.
I was gonna say Lawler, and
he's had some things worked on, but fuck, he doesn't have anything bionic. Lawler still can have a fucking match and throw a drop kick. I think he'll look better at 75 than Vince does now, even though Vince had the physique advantage all those years. Maybe that's the reason why Lawler looks better now.
And I think Lawler had a good doctor because it appears that Lawler and Ric Flair both had face work done, but Lawler just looks like another version of Lawler. Flair, it did like radically change the way he looked, I thought.
I just, what did he have done? 'Cause I don't know
His
these
face.
things.
His face.
Well, I mean, what part of he still got a...
Well, a facelift.
He would... If you would have told people 30 years ago he was going to have anything done, Arn would have said, well, hey, get that fucking nose shaved down. He used to call Flair Beak. Hey, Beak.
Did he have a nickname for everyone?
He had a nickname for everybody. Nikita was Cue Ball, and then when we started wearing the nice, expensive suits, he became GQ Ball. And
Tully was Wombat.
Wombat. Or Eddie Munster, depending on the fucking... and Bobby was Butte. But anyway, nevertheless, I don't know. But all I'm saying is Lawler has somehow managed physically to defy time to that level, and even died. Still didn't fucking hurt him. But Vince was he had that commanding presence, whether on television or in person, when he walked in the room and he had the voice and he stood up straight and you knew it, and he was always had this serious gravitas to him, and now it's a shocking change, and I feel bad for him.
He kind of looks like Mr. Peanut now.
What, there was a monocle and a top hat?
He's looks like shriveled up. He's like a shriveled up old Vince
come on.
McMahon.
He can still kick the shit out of any other 75-year-old man except for Vern Gagne.
I'm off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of 75-year-olds who I would put up against Vince. I don't know.
It's tough. Well, wait a minute.
I'll put Sylvester Stallone against Vince.
Hold
I'll take
on.
Stallone.
I'm just thinking Dundee, I think, is 75 now. Bill Dundee, if he hit Vince with one of his working punches, he'd go down still to this day.
I would take Dundee over Vince in a fight right now.
Yeah. You would, because...
Here's a big question for you. Bill Watts has cracked 80. Do you think Bill Watts...
That's right.
Do you think he could still throw a punch?
I'm pretty sure he could. I'm pretty sure. Well, a working punch or a real punch?
A punch.
Or both?
Well, was there a difference? A real punch. A real punch.
I was going to say, at least he would try not to hurt you. The result would be similar, but he'd try with a working punch not to. Actually, you know what? Drop kick. It was a rip. I can't remember who he was working with when he did this, but he told Bobby and Dennis the story before the last Stampede matches, so they knew what was up when he called it. But apparently he had been working with a guy, and as he shot the guy off, it was a main event, and it was somebody that he was fucking, on the same level as Watts, wasn't just telling the boss what to do or whatever. He's shooting the guy off, and the guy said, hit me with a drop kick. And so when the guy came back, Watts just drew back and punched him right in the fucking face. He said, that's my drop kick, motherfucker. So he started it when he's making his comeback after Dog would give him the iceberg tag, because Dog at that point was fucking coked out and was not present mentally in some of those matches. But Watson started making his comeback, boom, 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 and he'd shoot Bobby or Dennis, either one off, and he'd say, drop kick, and they'd, oh, shit, and they'd come back and he'd punch him right in the fucking face. And then he had this spot he wanted to do for Dennis to get his color, right, where he would punch Dennis, and Dennis take a bump and turn over on his hands and knees, and Watts would come and throw a football kick to Dennis's forehead. And he was like, oh, he was going to come right over the edge of the forehead, right? He said, you'll never feel it. First time he did it, bam! Dennis said he saw so many stars he couldn't find his fucking blade. And so every night for the first 3 or 4 nights, he'd get his juice that way, because he got juice on Bobby and Dennis in each match of what do we have, 15 double juice on both of them in each one of the matches. But the people had to get what they paid for. Anyway, by the 3rd or 4th match, no, God, it was deeper into it than that. But still, with like 6 or 7 of them left, Watts tore his hamstring. And that's what we went in the Superdome, the tape from the Superdome that still exists of that match. Watts has his thigh taped from the knee to his fucking crotch, because he had tore his fucking thigh muscle, his quad or whatever. And so Dennis said, God damn it, he said he was kicking me in the head so hard it tore his fucking muscle. So then Dennis had to get on his hands and knees even lower for Wozniacki because he couldn't get his foot up off the ground. But anyway, drop kick.
Do you think anyone has the guts to say to Vince, Vince, you look ridiculous, that you got to do something else if you're going to be on camera?
No, well, he doesn't look ridiculous. He's not wearing the New Day's, entrance costume.
Did you see his eyebrows?
I saw the eyebrows were ridiculous. He looks like an old man, and the one guy that everybody that knew him thought would never age, and the one guy that they've seen with all that vim and vigor on television, even if you've never met him or seen him in person, I think it's just at this point it may be to have him stand in the ring and do the same type of delivery or deliver the message the same kind of way. It might be it's a bummer now. Maybe he should be in a boardroom setting with the table and the chair or whatever. I mean, make use of he's the most famous wrestling personality they still have in the company. Make use of him, but don't have him doing the same kind of shit he used to do, because then you're comparing it to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And anybody's going to lose something.
Well, Jim, let's get to another question, and this is another very popular topic that many people...
Another popular topic?
A very popular topic that many people... Many people have sent in questions about it on Twitter.
Do you pop out at parties? Are you unpopular?
Many people have sent in questions in various fashion to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com, but we'll use one from Twitter here. This was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag cornydrivethrough from Heel Champa. What are your thoughts on the news that WWE sent Keith Lee back to the Performance Center? I thought Lee's work and agility were amazing considering his size, but I would like to hear your take on this one, and we've received a ton of questions about this. I have an article pulled up too. Apparently, Keith Lee...
Okay, well, fill us all in. For those of us who do not live and die by this information, fill us in exactly what's going on here.
Well, let me just ask you before I go forward. Do you know anything about this already?
I do not know anything about Keith Lee.
Okay.
So no.
Well, here's an article. I'll pull it up from the Wrestling Observer
I
site.
thought he had just gone to the main roster, right? Did they just send him back?
He did. Well, here's the article. This one's from the Wrestling Observer site. Not written by Dave. Someone else wrote this, Josh Nason. As reported by Dave Meltzer in this week's Wrestling Observer newsletter, WWE Chairman Vince McMahon recently, quote, threw a fit about the working ability of certain main roster talent, ordering some of those in his crosshairs to do additional training at the Performance Center. Meltzer noted in particular, some of the talent that drew McMahon's ire are of the larger variety. PW Insider's Mike Johnson put some names to that on Friday, reporting Keith Lee, Otis, Dabo Kato, Dio Madden, and Omos, I think that's how you pronounce that.
Omos? Is it almost?
AJ Styles' bodyguard.
Almost Omos?
Are among those who are taking classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays with Adam Pearce and Drew Gulak. Arturo Ruas was another wrestler that is believed to need additional work, but he is currently injured. Following his NXT Championship loss to Karrion Kross, Lee was called up after SummerSlam and immediately began a feud with Randy Orton. He has been a fixture on Raw, but recently made his main event debut in a win against Angel Garza.
Okay, but so he hasn't been sent back.
He's not back at NXT, but he's taking
NXT
classes.
or to developmental, but he's back. Okay, well, there's several things. Number one, that was not unusual with guys in the OVW days. That guys would be, I mean, not guys that have been on the roster for, main roster for years would suddenly be splitting their time between both, but guys who had been brought up would still, there'd be a transition period sometime, or maybe they'd say, well, hey, we'll have them hang out in Louisville the 3 days a week or whatever and still go to class. But so this is not revolutionary. Secondly, obviously nobody's saying that Keith Lee and Dabo Kato and Famous Amos and all of those people are at the same level of experience or talent or the amount of progress in their in-ring career, whatever the fuck. They're not at the same level. But what I'm seeing here especially since a lot of it is big guys, is Vince, I'm just trying to read the mental telepathy that he sends out. That's how he used to tell us how to do a lot of things, by mental telepathy, and we wouldn't pick up on it. And then he'd say, God damn it, I wanted it done this way. He doesn't think any of these big guys can work like big guys and get over like big guys anymore. And so he's he might have seen something that one or two guys did and just said, you know what, all these guys, make sure they're having a class with Adam Pearce. Tell them how to work like fucking giants. That's as possible as anything. And also the way that they have phrased that, not happy with their work, it's because it's such a one-dimensional way to write this article, because they don't really understand the difference. Vince is not talking about, I'm sure that he feels that Keith Lee's power slam is just wonderful, and his splash off the top rope is great and doesn't hurt anybody or whatever. He's not talking about teach these guys. Well, maybe in Dabba-Kato's case, we haven't seen much of him. I don't know how he is. Maybe, but and Otis is a guy we said, wow, look at some of the things he's done, which has probably come back to bite him in the ass, because that guy shouldn't do a lot of the things he can do, unless it may be the main event at WrestleMania. But he's not having them teach them more moves or how to do the moves better or perform the moves, which is what a lot of people think when they hear teach them how to work. We've said before, Keith Lee is an amazing athlete, but he works with some guys that are 150 pounds lighter than he is, like it's equal, like it's even, like it's supposed to be even. We've said that on several occasions, that he has the potential to be a huge star, but that he needs to be a more fearsome giant. Maybe Vince don't like that cheerful, Fraser Crane delivery. I don't fucking know, but that's what probably I would have to say if they're giving him to Adam Pearce. And who else did you say?
Drew Gulak.
Haven't met Drew, but if they're giving him to Adam Pearce, Vince is wanting to teach them more thought about what they're doing and why and what they should do and shouldn't, and how to get over as big guys and as impressive big guys, and in that vein. That's what they're doing. And I can't say that shouldn't be done. But I can pretty much guarantee you that Vince just saw one guy maybe do and just said, I've had enough. Because I've seen this all over the place and blah, 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 and these guys need to learn how to fucking work.
And if there's one thing we know, Vince loves his big guys.
Yes, these are guys that he will, if they give him anything, he'll make them $1 million fucking dollars. Because he's predisposed to like them already, but they can't go out there and have... Didn't we see Keith Lee at one point working fairly competitively with Johnny Sameface on NXT?
He did, but you can't blame him for that if they're putting him in there with Johnny Sameface and they're telling him, he's a main event guy. You have to work with him like he's the size of Damian Priest.
And that's why Vince is sending him back down, because I didn't say they were teaching him right. That's what the unnamed AEW guy said. We're doing what we were taught. Who fucking taught you this shit? That's the fault of the inexperienced promoter and booker allowing himself to be misled on talent. If they come from schools where they were taught to do all that shit, they didn't come from very good fucking schools. I can say that as someone who personally had a hand in training most of the big stars